I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. You simply pour a can into your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. So pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 100. Today in the show, to celebrate this huge milestone, we're bringing on an expert panel of guests to discuss some of the deer hunting world's most debated questions. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear, and today we are celebrating 100 episodes of the Wired Hunt podcast, and we have got a really terrific show for you. We have what I think is the most exciting lineup of guests we've ever had in a single show. We're going to be discussing some super interesting hunting topics, and we're going to be giving away some great prizes, which I'll announce at the end. So, like I said, 100th episode, we're going to do this up big. And very quickly, the plan for today's episode is to put some of the most discussed and debated deer hunting questions to a panel of guests, including 3 of the country's most respected deer hunters and managers. Those are Bill Winke, Dr. Grant Woods, and Lee Lakosky. Now, we've had all 3 of these gentlemen on the show before, but just in case you're not familiar, Bill Winke is an outdoor writer and creator of MidwestWhitetail.com and the Midwest Whitetail TV show. Dr. Grant Woods is a wildlife biologist, consultant, writer, and creator of Growing Deer TV. And Lee Lakosky is the host of the outdoor channels Crush with Lee and Tiffany. So, big names, exciting people to talk to here in a minute. But before we kick off our panel discussion, I just want to take a second to thank you. To thank all of you who have been listening back in 2014, 2015, and now 2016. You've been with us for 100 episodes, and every one of these episodes has been somewhere between an hour or 2. So you've spent hundreds of hours with me and Dan, and I'm surprised and amazed that you're still here with us, but I am certainly appreciative of it. I don't know, it's hard to put into words what this podcast has kind of meant to me, and I think being able to have this opportunity to talk to you all every week, to share my experiences, my ups and downs, and then get to speak to all these different great guests, learn from them with you and from each other too. That's just been pretty special. So I don't know, Dan, how do you feel about this? 100 episodes down.
That's a big number. I don't even know if I've ever counted that high before, but I can tell you one thing. Not only do I love talking with the guests that we have on, I really love just BSing with you, and then the interaction after the shows are over with the listeners. I love emails from people, and as I'm sure you do, and any interaction on social media. It's just, I don't know. I think what it comes down to is our love, the listeners, mine, yours, the love for the outdoors and hunting in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like this podcast and this community is kind of just a great big party and celebration for that love and for that shared passion we have for doing all these things outdoors and chasing deer and feeding our families with terrific 100% wild organic venison. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that, and we are super blessed to be able to sit here and talk about it every week. And I hope and I think everyone's been enjoying it along the way too, and finding it as interesting and entertaining as I think you and me have. Because if no one is, at least you and me have been having fun. That's for sure, right?
Right. And we're fans. I mean, we're not only, there's not really any difference between us and the listeners other than we are the ones who ask the questions. I mean, we're just, fans of hunting and want to soak up this knowledge just like everybody else does.
Yeah, so true. And I think, on that note, we have a lot of information to soak up here in today's episode. So I'm going to try to make our little introduction here as quick as possible so we can get right into this panel discussion. Like I mentioned, we've got some great guests. We're going to learn some very interesting things, and hopefully we'll be able to toss some interesting questions their way as well. So here's the plan, Dan. We are going to take a very brief break for a word from our partners at Sitka, and then we will kick off our 100th episode panel discussion with Bill Winke, Lee Lakosky, and Dr. Grant Woods. All right, so as mentioned, we need to pause briefly to thank our partners at Sitka Gear. And today we're going to be starting our new Sitka Stories series. And to kick us off, we have a story from Don Wilson. And on this day back in 2012, Don was headed out for a mid-October hunt with modest expectations. But little did he know, there were much bigger things in store.
Okay, so 2012, I go to a spot that I've been hunting for years. It's actually public ground. It's actually federal ground. So I hike in. The spot that I usually go to is about 1.5 miles back into the woods. And it's pretty rough country for Ohio, up and down hills. So I go in, I hike in the morning, and I'm running a little late. I get back in there, and it's already cracking daylight. So I climb into my climber, get up in the tree. And one thing that I always do when I use a climber back in the woods like that is I always take my rattling horns and kind of make some cover-up noise, right when I get settled. So I did that this morning and pull out my phone to text my wife and tell her that I'm in the tree and everything's good, and look up, and here comes...
And here comes a buck. In fact, in the moment, he looks like a nice buck. So in just a matter of seconds, Don sees the buck and shoots him. But when he walks up on the deer a little bit later, he has another surprise coming. This is not just a nice deer. This is not the kind of deer you expect to shoot while hunting public land on a random mid-October day. So he pulls out his phone to share the news.
And I call my dad, and I tell my dad that I killed another big one. And he says, how many points is he? And I said, well, I haven't counted. So I start counting, and I get to 12. And my dad says, wow, 12-pointer, that's a great deer. And I said, Dad, that's on one side. Dad says, holy crap, probably something else, So I keep counting. I get to 24, and, my dad's like, you want me to come down there and help you? And I'm like, Dad, by the time you get here, I'll have him out. And so I started dragging, tied him to my belt. I have my climber. I have my backpack full of gear. I have my bow. And I had a 204-inch buck tied to my belt, hiking out 1.5 miles back into state land.
Now that, my friends, is a hell of a story. A Sitka story, in fact, as Don was wearing a Sitka Stratus jacket and pant on that unexpectedly fateful day. And now, let's get back to the show and kick off our panel discussion. All right, with us on the line now is our entire distinguished panel of guests, Bill Winke, Lee Lakosky, and Dr. Grant Woods. Dan and I really appreciate you all joining us today, and since we've got so many things to cover, and since I already provided a brief introduction to each of you before you got on the line, we're going to skip any small talk and instead just get right into the meat and potatoes of our panel discussion. So, gentlemen, Dan and I have put together a list of some of the most commonly asked and debated deer hunting questions that we hear from our audience and a few of our own that we're curious about. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pose each of these questions to you to discuss or debate or answer in whatever way you see fit. So given how many of us are on the line, we're going to direct the question to one of you at the beginning, and then we can move from there to each additional person. Think of this just like any other in-person panel discussion you've seen before. So I'm not going to beat around the bush. Let's get right into the good stuff. And I want to start with you, Bill. with this one that I'm sure you've heard before, and I'm sure you've all heard before, but we're going to go through it anyways to see how all three of you might differ or not. Is the October lull fact or fiction?
I think that, in my experience at least, the general concept seems like it exists. Individual deer seem to exhibit so much difference in their personalities, if you want to call it that, that you'll have some bucks that move during the daylight in the middle of October, but in general, what I've seen on my trail cameras is a definite movement towards nocturnal activity in the middle of October, and like I said, I mean that's only been based on trail camera studies that we've done, and not even studies. I mean, we're just trying to kill these things, and when they're not moving during the daylight, that makes it pretty hard, and you run the cameras and you don't find them in daylight. So I'm going to say there is something going on in the middle of October that seems to shut down daylight activity.
Okay. What do you think, Grant?
Well, I think Bill's pretty spot on. We might dig a little deeper so deer have their winter coat on, but October can have a lot of warm days, so it's just really a metabolic thing. They don't want to move that much because it's hard for deer to get rid of heat, body heat. They don't have sweat glands like some other mammals do. So they're also at that point in time switching to a carbohydrate diet. Where I live, they're chasing acorns. Where maybe a couple other guys live, they're chasing cut corn or cornfields or something. And carbs put a lot of energy or body heat in the body, so it's a double whammy. You take a warmer day with a big fur coat on and a lot of energy, you just feel like moving when it's cooler outside, which is nighttime.
Makes sense to me. Now, Lee, have you seen anything different, or do you feel differently about this at all?
No, actually, both of them actually hit it on the head. Because I was going to say, if you were to ask me first, I would have said it kind of depends on the weather. Because we've had years like in October where we had a really cool Octobers, and it was phenomenal. I mean, and not like I said rutting activity, but just deer out on their feet. Our biggest bucks were out in clover fields or winter wheat fields and just, eating like they had, in August and September. And, always like on the shady side of the field, they come out early, to start with. But when we have warm weather, just like Grant was talking about, boy, then just basically shut them down in the middle of October. And that's a good point that they're starting to get their winter hides on her. And, they're basically sticking to nighttime movement, but we've had Octobers that have been phenomenal. I mean, it wasn't so many years ago. It was like maybe 5 or 6 years ago. We had this really cool October, and then it got into November, and it was warm. And man, our October was way better than our November. We were seeing more of our big bucks on their feet during then. So it's almost weather dependent, basically, from what I've seen.
All right, next question. And we'll go back to Bill again. If you could only hunt 1 week out of the entire season, what week would you pick and why?
I must get that question on our website 400 times. I should have a button that I can push that just plays back my response. It really is kind of a composite of what we've already talked about in some sense. And if you tell me what the weather's going to be like, I'll tell you which week to hunt. But assuming that we have a consistent weather pattern where, it's going to be equal temperatures from the 25th of October until the 25th of November, and it's all going to be, relatively cool and seasonal type weather, it just seems like November 7th through the years has produced the most big buck kills for myself and my pro staff. And, prior to that, I would quiz all my buddies, and it always seemed like November 7th was sort of the key day. So, if that's the key day, then pick, plus or minus a couple of days on either side, and assuming the correct weather, that would be your magic week.
What about you, Grant?
Yeah, somewhere in there. It kind of depends a little bit on latitude and where you are. The guys in South Alabama are going, we don't get rolling here till February, and I think a lot of people don't realize South Florida, deer start breeding in early July, late August. Actually, their season is time for the rut hunt to be at that time. Who wants to hunt in that level of mosquitoes? I don't know, but that's the factor. So, but throughout most of whitetails range somewhere in that early part of November, weather being equal. I think Bill stated that very well. A cold front is if I had any magic I could ever pull out for deer hunting, it would be to get a cold front to occur when I had time to hunt.
Gotcha. That narrows it down.
Good point.
What about you, Lee?
I go back to even like what Bill said. The 7th was like one of my favorite days, and I don't know if you remember, Bill, that one of those first big ones that I shot with Lee Murphy and sat down, and I was on the 7th. We came over to your house to look at it. So nervous about the shot and everything, but I killed so many of them on the 7th. But now with the farms that I have here and the food that I have, if I could only pick 1 week, it would be late. It would be January, the last week of the season, 5th through the 10th. And when we get during the rut here, it's always good. It's always the funnest time to hunt. When bucks are chasing and grunting, you can rattle and all that stuff. But my biggest bucks, normally, the ones that I'm looking for, it's way easier to find them. If it gets cold late season, they're out almost every night. And, it just gets you in a better position to get a shot at one of them. And during the rut, a lot of our biggest ones, they kind of just go underground. You might have a couple shots at them, right at that pre-rut. Once they get a doe, then they kind of go underground, and you're going to catch them in between does. But when I get to late season, if I had to bet, if I got a big deer that I want to hunt, if I don't get them in those first few days of October, if I was a betting man, I'd say I'm going to shoot them in January or late December. And we shoot them in the rut every year too. But I think my best chances are if it gets cold here in late season, and then I'm going to see them more consistently than I will during the rut. If I only had 1 week to hunt, it would probably be my last 7 days of the season here, like January, up to January 10th, 3rd through the 10th or something like that.
This is Bill again, Lee, and that's a good point because it sort of brings up the question of hunting one deer versus hunting, any
deer
class. Yeah, because we do have trouble with them here during the rut too. We might see more bucks of a certain age class on their feet, but we might really struggle trying to find that specific one deer. And the late season is a lot more consistent as long as you got the food and the weather.
Yeah, that's a great point, though, that if you're just hunting a buck, if you're going out of state or someplace, just going hunting, you would pick that week of the 7th, say, in the Midwest at least. But like for me personally, or at least if you have your own farm and you have a deer that you've been watching for several years and things that, you've got them to the age you want, our best chance, we're going to kill most of our big deer late season when it gets cold. But if you were just going someplace, I would definitely agree with Bill, at least in the Midwest. But that's all we really hunt. I don't really, hunt south or anything like that. The 7th has been, shot more deer on the 7th than any other day. But Tiffany, on the other hand, she shot more deer on December 24th than any other day. So, just it kind of depends. Like Bill says, a good point. If you're just hunting deer, it'd definitely be the 7th for me.
So continuing on this theme of, when to hunt. One of the popular theories out there related to the timing of the rut, which in turn relates to some of the things we've been talking about when to hunt, is that the moon in some cases, some people believe, might influence the timing of the rut or some things along that lines, whether it be the timing of the rut or any other kind of movement. Lee, do you think that the moon influences deer behavior, and if so, how?
Well, yeah, if you would have asked me this a couple of years ago, I probably would have said not really. I've had, great hunts on new moons. I've had great hunts on full moons. But as I've been noticing over the years, you use all your trail cameras, and most people just take their pictures of their bucks and say, okay, I'm going to try to, pattern this buck or something with a trail camera. And that's hard to do unless you have a million trail cameras. A deer's on his feet during daylight every day at some point. So I just start kind of more looking at just pictures, deer pictures. Okay, when are the daylight pictures? When am I getting them? Because it doesn't matter if it's a bunch of does. Bucks, they're obviously they're different, but they're still just deer. When are all the deer moving? And it seems to me I found coming up to the full moon, those 10 days before, if you get right at the full moon, they're just coming out at last light. 10 days before, they're coming out an hour before. You can kind of almost time it that way. But then after the full moon, those 10 days after, it seems like it switched over to the mornings are a lot better. Those 10 days going away from it. That's something I've really seen basically looking at my pictures. It's not so much, I don't see any, on one or the other, but it seems like the 10 days going up to it, the evenings, say 10 days out, they might be coming out an hour and a half, early before before sunset, and as you get right to full moon, they're coming out just right at last light. And then when you get the days after the full moon, like in the morning, the evenings don't seem to be as good as the mornings. All of a sudden, right after it, they're just coming out. They're still moving a little bit right after. And then you get 10 days away from it. It seems like they're on their feet, for a good hour after sunrise. So that's the only thing I've seen mostly is looking at trail camera pictures a lot and not paying attention so much just to bucks, just looking at daytime movement. If all the does are on their feet, likely the bucks are on their feet too, because they're just deer as well as does are. Of course, it's different, but like you said, when all the does come out early, you pretty much can bet, hey, the bucks are going to come out early too. But if your first doe comes out at 2 minutes before it's dark, your bucks are not going to make it out. I really pay attention to a lot of our pictures, but that's just what I've been seeing over the last couple of years, and it's probably more with the time the moon rises and sets rather than if it's full or not. But like I said, I've had great hunts on all kinds of moon phases and everything else, and you look at it a lot, but it seems like weather kind of trumps everything. If it's cold, they're going to be moving, but that's what I've seen, and I had never really paid that much attention to it in the past, so I'd be interested to see what Bill and Grant have to say about it, because just in the past couple of years I've been noticing that. And so right after the full moon, I'm going to be hunting mornings and concentrate mornings more, and before it, more in the evenings.
That's pretty consistent with what Mark Drury has shared with us about the same topic too. That's kind of what he's been seeing as well. So I'm curious, Bill, you hunt in a similar area to Lee and Mark relatively. Are you seeing similar types of behavior?
I mean, I think I'm going to sort of hand this one over to Grant after I say my piece, because I haven't paid enough attention to it, I guess. I've never felt like it made a difference, anecdotally, just looking back on my hunting experiences. So when it came time to really start focusing in on my trail cameras, I didn't pay enough attention to it there to see any trends either. So I don't have a good answer for you on this one.
Fair enough. So Grant, the pressure's on you now.
It's confusing to me because I want to believe in the moon really bad. But there's, over 10,000 deer now that have been fitted with GPS collars. And some people have looked specifically, researchers, at this moon question, and others have just kind of as an afterthought go back and reanalyze their data. But to a study, at least the ones that's been published, no one has found a correlation of declination, that's degrees north and south the equator the moon goes, or phase of the moon, or distance. The moon has an elliptical orbit, so distance from the surface of the moon to the surface of the earth. All those factors have been studied pretty deeply, and no one can find a relationship. So some really good hunters that I respect, Mark Drury being one of them, and Jerry Martin at Bass Pro, boy, I mean, they pretty much set their deer hunting calendar by the moon. And I'm not saying those guys don't have something figured out that scientists don't, but from a scientific point of view, there is no relationship between deer activity and the moon, period. I know I just got a lot of hate mail after that one. But
does that even mean
that really wouldn't surprise me, though, Grant, because, for so many years, it never seemed like it made all that much difference. Like, for me, I was looking at all my camera pictures, daylight pictures, and you start seeing some of that before the full moon and after more data. But that, you don't know if that's just coincidence or what, because we're hunting, like Bill said, we're fortunate to be able to hunt most of the days anyway, so I don't really care if it's a full moon or not.
Sure.
And it just, I've had great hunts on some days and, on full moons and terrible ones, but it seems like the deer all know it. You can go out one day and there'll be deer out everywhere around all our fields, daylight, on the roads, every place. And you have, like, the very next day, same weather conditions, everything, there's not a deer out at all. So, they all know it seems like, but I can't really figure out what exactly it is.
Why don't you explain that one, Brad? I mean, I've been trying to find that switch for, once in a while we think we can nail it, especially during the late season, but gosh, it just seems like you'll have one day, like Lee said, that it'll be wide open, and the next day it'll be just dead. And I haven't found anything.
Y'all both kill way bigger bucks than I do, so I obviously can't explain it, but I'm puzzled by it, and I think a lot of researchers are, but unequivocally based on all this GPS, and we're talking now millions and millions of locations, weather is any way you slice it, weather is a way bigger determinant or factor in timing of deer activity than the moon.
Yeah,
and it'd be so convenient if it was the moon, because then we could, plan ahead and, use a calendar. But weather, like, it's turkey season here in Missouri, and I didn't hunt this morning. I said, well, it's going to be raining, I'm going to work today, and it was a pretty nice morning. The weatherman lied to me again. We can't get it right 24 hours out, let alone figuring out what's going to do in November. So, but I think weather is absolutely the key in the moon. If there is any relationship, it's a shallow secondary relationship.
I don't want to hijack your panel, Mark, but Grant, do you think, or have you seen anything with barometric pressure with those data points? I mean, everybody wants to talk about that now instead of the moon, it seems like, but that might be a correlation that fits better.
Yeah, I think there is, Bill. The problem is there's so many weather factors. We have wind speed and barometric pressure, and some of them are related, obviously, with fronts moving through. So the bottom line is, we have deer with GPS collars too, or we used to, and what we found was I think most hunters know: right before a front and right after a front are the prime times to be out there. And just personal observation, the most daylight movement I've ever seen in my life, I mean, just to a point I still remembered, it was just unreal, was I happened to be doing research on the coast of South Carolina foolishly when Hurricane Hugo came in. Being a Missouri boy, I didn't know what a Class 4 hurricane was, so I stayed there. The local guy said, it'd be like a bad thunderstorm. So I stayed there in the field. It was a horrible mistake. And the day and a half before that hurricane come ashore, there was just mature bucks in the daylight everywhere. I've never seen anything like it since. And the barometer dropped really, really low, a record for that county, as a matter of fact, and dropped really low. And clearly the deer and dogs and squirrels, everything I was observing since that storm coming in, and had more sense than I did because they were preparing for it. I was just out measuring deer rubs. But so I think the more extreme the front, probably the more daytime behavior you will see.
Yep.
So continuing
we look for like the cold, high pressure days, like late season is always seems to be good. But I think, like Grant said, it's on the fronts, because you get that high pressure after. But then if you have like 5 or 6, 7, 8 days of high pressure and cold weather, it seems like the deer activity gets less. And then you get that change again come up, now with low pressure and heavier humidity, and boom, they move again. It seems like just on the changes, like on the fronts, on the before and after them is always the best.
I think the changes are more important during the late season than they are earlier in the season, because you'll get a lot of deer movement on a warm front sometimes if it's been really cold.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So continuing down this path of what maybe gets deer to move, and maybe time of year will come into this next question, but we'll start with Bill. On your farms, when do you start to see scrapes open up, and how focused are you on hunting fresh sign?
My situation is probably a little bit different than some people, but I'm sure they start popping up sometime in September, maybe mid-September here. We start to see the first few along the field edges. But I've never been a big sign hunter. I tried it for a while and tried to make sense of all of it, and I always got more and more confused because the pieces didn't always add up and make sense to me. So I started trying to figure out how to hunt travel corridors and really kind of focus in on the path of least resistance for the deer and funnels and terrain features and stuff like that seemed like they were a little bit more predictable. And that's more of a rut sort of a hunting strategy. I think the early season and late season, I think sign becomes a bigger part of that, and especially fresh sign, because the deer, they tend to be a little bit more patternable outside of the rut. But that's been kind of my thing. I'm not a huge sign hunter, never really was, but if I was going to focus in on sign, it would be really early and probably late.
So, Grant, is there any scientific fact or data to show that deer start scraping at a certain time of year?
No, I mean, as velvet comes off and testosterone levels increase, number of scrapes or time spent scraping increases. and it stays high until testosterone levels drop below a certain threshold, which also triggers antler fall. But deer will use scrapes year-round, just to a much lesser extent. As far as hunting sign, I joke all the time with my buddies. They call up and say, "Man, I just found this place. It's just covered with scat and tracks, and it's great." And I said, "Unless you're hunting with your Brinkman spotlight, does that really matter?" Because, of course, deer are typically going to be on their feet more during the nighttime in a hunted area, in a pressured area. And where you find the maximum amount of sign is rarely where deer are going to be during daylight hours. So hunting the maximum amount of sign may not be a good plan. Late winter, you've got to cut cornfield. There's all kind of tracks and scat out there, and probably some daylight activity. But I want to hunt the travel corridors to all that sign. I want to hunt two places they're seeing the maximum amount of sign.
What are you seeing on your farms, Lee?
Same as both of them. I mean, it's funny you mentioned that, because it's like, Grant made a good point to make. They use scrapes all times of the year, but I started just checking cameras this morning. I had the son out with me. He was taking a nap, so I put him in the Ranger with me. We're out checking cameras, most turkeys right now, but because we have some of them still up on scrape. There's one of the scrapes that just hit. It rained last night, which I hit this morning, so you see them scraping on some of the stuff that all times of the year. But I don't really use them too much either. And like Grant said, a lot of this stuff is at night, especially like in October, once you get to November. You never see any of our big ones paying any attention to scrapes, unless maybe they're in between does and somebody walking by one. But I do use them a lot in October, just mostly for cameras. And just like Bill and Grant said, I don't like hunt over them, or, "Oh man, there's a new scrape over there, rubs, I got to go hunt over there." To me, it's just like we have our field edge scrapes that are just kind of community scrapes that every buck that comes in there will hit them. So we got cameras on a lot of them, and mostly just take inventory of deer. Is all my same deer here? Is anything new showing up? And I figure I know how to hunt them. Like they said, we got our travel corridors and places that over the years you learn. Okay, they come out to this field. This is the way they're usually coming in, and you kind of know how to cut them off before they get there. In a lot of cases, to get them out in good camera light and stuff. But I mostly use those scrape stuff just for cameras to take inventory of deer. I figure I know how, pretty good idea how to kill them and where to hunt them at. I just need an inventory of them. And it works great for that, because like Grant said, a lot of them, especially in October, is at night. But at least it gives me a good indication of what my inventory is for camera use. I use them a lot as far as cameras, but not so much for hunting, hardly at all for hunting.
Yeah, that's consistent with what I do as well, and what we've heard from a lot of people really over the past couple of years on this podcast. There seems to be this movement from, I don't know if it was a decade ago or 15 years ago, when scrapes were like all the rage in the hunting media, and then more studies started to come out showing that most of that use was after dark, and now I think you're seeing more people either using them primarily as trail camera locations, or I think there's, a lot of people talk about those last couple days of October. There seems to be an uptick maybe in daylight visits possibly, but it seems like this is pretty consistent with most of the things we've been hearing. Now, I want to take I want to pivot to a totally different aspect of hunting. We've talked about some interesting tactic things here, but I want to ask a slightly different kind of question, kind of reset the tone here, and we'll start again with Bill. Bill, why do you hunt?
Oh boy, I don't know. I mean, I've just always loved it. I guess that when I was a boy growing up, it just got in my blood, and I don't know that there's a reason for it really, other than some people were put on earth to do certain things, and I feel like I was put here to hunt. There's a couple other things I think that that fit my nature pretty well, but I don't know. I mean, I never was able to put any kind of words to that question when people ask. It's just I was born to do it, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that feel that way. It just fits. When I'm outside hunting something, that's when I feel the best. So I guess that's my answer.
I think a lot of people can relate. Grant, what do you think? Why do you hunt?
Yeah, I don't know if I have good words either. I am probably most alive and alert and feeling whole when I'm hunting, when I'm acting as a predator, I guess. My senses are tuned up, and I'm probably running on all 8 cylinders there. And if I'm on a couch watching golf, I'm napping half the time or whatever. I'm not running on all 8 cylinders. So hunting to me, and I enjoy the meat. I enjoy the wild game. My family readily, Tracy and the girls, we consume what we harvest. I mean, it's not like, well, this is ethical thing to do, so guess I better get out there and skin this doe out and eat it. I mean, we look forward to it. That's what we primarily consume is wild game. So, and I'm sure a lot of it is my father was a hunter. It's just a culture that I feel comfortable with, and the men I admired when I was a young boy were hunters and outdoorsmen, and so again, with Bill, it just fits me. I would be uncomfortable if you said, Grant, you have to go down to the Y and play basketball all November this year. I wouldn't be very happy.
I'd come out of there with a torn hamstring and a four ACL. How many ACLs do I have in my body? They'd all be tore.
What about you, Lee?
Same thing. I think if you ask anyone, it's probably the same thing. And I don't think it was nothing learned or anything like that. I remember as a kid, as far back as I can remember my dad and my grandpa would go deer hunting. I don't know if I was 2, 3, 4, or whatever age you can remember. But I remember just sitting by the window for hours every day, waiting for them to come back to see if they had shot one. Of course, it was up in northern Minnesota, so they rarely did. There were very few deer back then. Not so many now, but if somebody had shot one, I mean, I was out there with a toy gun and I was shooting and hunting it. Ever since I can remember. I mean, all my sisters and relatives, and man, that kid is nuts. As soon as I'd sleep in my Uncle Mickey's room up in northern Minnesota, because it faced the east, and as soon as the sun came up, man, I had my BB gun and I was out. My grandpa said, you can shoot any of the birds you want, but not the purple martins, because he liked those. And I still stacked purple martins. I cordwood back behind the barns up feeding. So he wouldn't see them, but I just ever since I can remember, just hunting something, and like Bill and Grant said, I mean, it's just where you feel most alive, and it's not something that you learned or anything like that. It's who you are, and I've always been that way. I always have, like I always tell people, man, I can't. Even my sisters, I have 5 sisters, and some of them hunt now, but they never did when I was growing up. And man, I just can't believe that. All you ever think about is hunting, because every job that I had, the college I went to, what classes I took, everything just surrounded around hunting first, and then, okay, I'll take these classes. I can go in the morning and the evening, and just worked everything around it. Even the job that I had when I was a chemical engineer, I took it because I get on shift, and I could have 7 days off every month, and I could line up my 2 weeks of vacation with my week off, and then I could have the whole month of November off, and the first few days of December. I mean, it was always about that. And my sisters would always be, man, how do you ever think about hunting? I think, yeah, well, I'm so sorry that you don't have something like that. Because I could never be depressed. I could never be, unhappy. I'm always thinking ahead, okay, what the season that's coming up. You're always excited about something. Just shed hunting, just kind of wrapped up with shed hunting. But now, okay, now you got turkey hunting, but, still looking at all the pictures, the deer are just starting to get big tennis balls on their head. You start looking, and by May, I know half the deer already just from their brow tines and stuff. So you're always excited about, looking forward to it. And it's just, my way of life. I mean, it's been the most important thing to me ever since I was a kid, and not something you learned or anything. It just happened that way.
Yeah, same here. I don't know. It's hard for me to tell my wife why I love hunting so much because she's not a hunter. So I just have to tell her, trust me, guy. Just trust me.
Yeah.
So changing gears back to maybe managing property or finding a way to keep deer on a property that you hunt. Grant, in your opinion, what is the single best way to keep a mature buck on a property that maybe you control? Oh,
well, I've failed at that. If you watch the show, we've had several of our prime hit list bucks tagged by neighbors lately, so maybe Bill and Lee can help me with this one. I'm not sure, but of course, deer want food, cover, water, and I think maybe there's some misunderstanding. The biggest motivation for deer is not the rut or food; it's survival. So fear is their biggest motivator, and so I think sanctuaries are probably the easiest tool you don't really have to do anything. Just let a pasture grow up or something get weedy or whatever it is, or just stay out of an area. Just stay out of an area, and deer will adapt to that being a safety zone. And even if you're a guy hunting 80 acres, and it seems like how could I possibly do that? But if you've got it in you, flag off 20 acres mentally and say we're just not going in there. And hopefully you locate that 20 acres strategically. But you'll be shocked at how deer will use that. And I'll just share, not to bore everyone with science, but a brief thing. Good colleagues of mine did some work down in Georgia, and where coyotes are really a problem right now, and they took 4 100-acre areas and put a coyote-proof fence around it, buried in the ground a foot and up 4 feet tall, and it exterminated all the coyotes that happened to be in those enclosures when they finished them, and had a bunch of GPS-collared deer in the area. And it was amazing even to me how quickly deer sensed that was an area of safety, that there were no deer, no coyotes in there, and centered their home range and even lived the majority of the time inside those 100-acre fences. And that's just an illustration of how important it is, security cover or the need to survive for deer. So I think a lot of people hunt every acre of their property, and if they would carve off a couple sanctuaries, they could probably do a lot better and hunt the edges, sanctuaries or travel corridors coming out of them, and see some daylight activity just because deer feel secure.
What do you think about that one, Bill?
Well, I think that Grant hit a really good point that I'll elaborate on real quick. But if you have a big property, you don't need sanctuaries as much as you do if you have a small property. And the people who are the least likely to want to have one are the ones who need it the most. If you take a situation of somebody with, say, 1,000 acres and they hunt the whole season, there's probably parts of that property that because the wind swirls or for one reason or another they just don't hunt there. It might be 200 acres or whatever it is. There's probably going to be places that they rarely get to. Whereas if you got the guy with a smaller piece of property, he feels like he has to have stands in every part of it or he's going to burn each stand out. So just by concentrating his energies into a smaller area, that pushes the deer out. So it's just the opposite of what most people think. The smaller the property, the more important they are.
What about you, Lee?
Yeah, I mean, this one is a little bit different. I noticed we have a feeder out at Linda's at Tiffany's mom's house right in front of her yard, in front of her, it's like 50 yards from her front door. And you notice right away when we put it there, you get some deer out there at 2 a.m. or something. If you walk by the window, deer would run. And now it's just been 5 or 6 years. She can drive in, we can drive our cars in. There'll be the bucks laying right in our yard by it. They don't really pay any attention to it. And how many of them are out in daylight, and we can let our dogs out, and they go out and go to the bathroom. They know not to chase deer. Deer don't they don't move away from the feeder a little bit, but then they just come right back to it. It's amazing the difference that you see, and it's no different really than deer in suburbs or anything else. It's not that they're they don't get any human intrusion. There's humans out all the time. I think it's just more that they have human intrusion all the time, and they've never bothered them, so they get to be used to it. And and I never set up our farms that way or anything, but I just started thinking about it, and I was like, I think that's why we have so much success of shooting a lot of our old deer, in broad daylight, not even right at the end, and a lot of them right on our fields, because, and to Grant's point, everyone says, do you have a sanctuary? I said, yeah, our timber. But the only time I really go in there is shed season. And then of course you got 9 months of, not really being in there, for them to settle back down from that. But on the flip side of that, I mean, our fields almost every day, checking cameras, checking the field, their plant number, seeing how they're doing our spraying, whatever. And I know a lot of people can't do that, but for us, when we live right here, 12 months of the year, I'm in each one of our fields, at least twice a week, whenever we're home, checking cameras or checking the fields or doing whatever. And then when we get to hunting season, we're fortunate, that we have, quite a few farms that we hunt. So it's not like I have to pound any one of them. So you kind of hunt them the same way, twice a week you're in there. And so over a 12-month period, our deer it never changes for them. And I think that's why a lot of our success we have in our fields is that, because even us going in and going out, even though we can't get in there and get out all the time, without them seeing you, they're used to us being in there, and they run to the edge of the woods, and then they come right back out. And so to Grant's point, our woods are basically our sanctuary. Not that we don't have some. We have, quite a few stands that are set up for rut and all that stuff. But a lot of times when we get a new farm, it'll take me 2 or 3 years to figure out where to get a stand in the timber, because it just takes those years of shed hunting. Okay, where are the does bedding? Where can I get? I don't want the does bedding right on top of me, then I can't get out. But see, every time you go in there, even if you don't see anything, it's like you're putting your scent down there. Even if you didn't see a deer, you think, okay, I got in and I got out clean. But the next deer that walks by that, 6 hours later, knows you've been there. So you really can never get in and out clean. So, like I said, not that we don't go in, in there during the rut and stuff, because we do. But 90% of our deer we shoot on is on the field edge. People will be like, man, you shoot all your deer on the edge of the field. But, yep. And part of that is too, because I have a time to, because I'll catch them in those, and not necessarily in your big fields, but we have so many little food plots that we dozed in and stuff that are in the middle of the timber that are secluded and things, and deer feel comfortable in those. But I just said I'll wait them out. I'll get one of our big ones in those fields, and we always do. But I think a lot of it is, we used to write articles and talk about, hey, no pressure, keep that pressure off. But to me, it seems like not necessarily less pressure, but more consistent pressure throughout the entire year. The deer know me. I mean, they know my truck. They know my Rangers. When I go in there, I check cameras, check stuff. A lot of times the deer run to the edge of the field and they'll stand there and feed. They don't even run out of the field while I'm there. And then they'll come back. And then a lot of times I'm putting out, minerals, or some in the summertime here we can run feeders. And I do, and not necessarily, not to feed deer. I mean, all of my feeders are on food plots. So there's plenty of food in them. But a lot of times, again, just for cameras to get an inventory of deer, like on a feeder, have some corn, up with some sugar beet crush or something in there that, that they really like. So they'll come over, seems like every night, and they take a few bites of it before they go back out to the field or something. I can take good inventory of it. But even when I'm there, I'm checking out, check the timer, make sure it works, and get the corn out and stuff. So and you look at your cameras, and 5 minutes after you're gone, deer are coming out. See if you check to see if you hit the button on it and sun the feeder or whatever. And, so we're just around them a lot, and they get used to us being there in the field, but not in the timber. At least if they can run into the edge of the timber, they'll just stay right there and come back out. But if I start going into the timber, then they can start running out onto our neighbors. And they've been very surprised. I mean, over the years, we lose very few deer to neighbors. We've been losing a lot of them to EHD lately, but not to neighbors. Sometimes you'll lose your 2 or 3 year olds if they shoot young ones. But boy, once we get them past like the 4, they become so much more homebodies here. 4 and 5, we hardly ever lose them. But we try to keep, lots of food and lots of cover. And we've been working on that really a lot over the past few years, hinge cutting and making sure I got, thick timber in there, lots of downfalls and treetops and get the sunlight in there and grow up the bottom where they've got security cover in there. But we just try to stay out of it, all of our timber for the most part. And just the fields, they're used to us being there. So when we're going in to hunt, going out to hunt, they see you and they run off, but then they just come right back out. And it's not like we used to, going in the timber, okay, I have to have a perfect, get in and get out scenario and without spooking anything, walk the creek bottoms and all that kind of stuff. When I've spent all year in those fields, I don't need to do that. So it's really become, you see like on Linda's feeder, how you notice that, at first deer would never come in there. And now we love going over. We don't hunt anywhere around her house because we just love seeing deer as much as we do hunting them. You just see 160, 170 inch deer laying in her yard. You can drive in with your car and they'll stay there, and you can walk in the house. They might get up and move a little bit, but they're just like deer in the suburbs that live in people's yards, and they're bedded in their driveways and things. They get used to people being there. And I think that's really why we've had a lot of success on our food plots, because we're in there a lot and they're used to us being in there. So even going in and out, it's not moving them on to your neighbors, but it's consistent pressure over 12 months of the year. It's not like you're totally out of there. When you go to Wisconsin, when the gun season opens, day 2 is definitely different than day 1, but you've had, 10 months of nobody in a lot of those places, and all of a sudden you got 1,000 people in there. They know something is different. For our deer, I think you go in there in July or go in there in November, the deer don't know the difference. It's always the same. So that's what I've been seeing on our places is that our timber is basically our sanctuary, and more not necessarily pressure, but more presence over the whole 12-month period where it never changes, and it's worked great for us. And that's, I'm not sure if that's exactly why, but that's my theory on why we're getting these, 5 and 6 year old deer out at 3 in the afternoon, with they're not coming out just at last light like they used to, but they're used to us being there 12 months of the year, so it's not freaking them out when we're going in and out and hunting those fields. So
yeah, that's pretty. It's very interesting, and it's so unique compared to what we hear in a lot of different instances. And I want to give you a follow-up question on that. But first, I believe, Bill, you did need to drop off now, right?
I'm going to drop in about 5 minutes. Excuse me. So I guess if you got one more for me, I'll hit that, and then I'm gonna have to get going.
Perfect. Well, then I'm gonna bring this to you because Lee, the circumstances you laid out there were really interesting, and you mentioned that before when we talked to you a year or so ago, and a lot of people had questions about this, and they were wondering, does this work in other places? Could this work on my kind of place? And I'm curious to you, Bill, now hearing what Lee described that works in his type of situation. Have you seen anything like that happen where you hunt? Could you see this working in other situations too?
Well, I think that, we do take advantage of this same type of behavior slightly differently. There's a lot of houses around my hunting area, and I think I pulled it up on the map one time, and there's 12 houses that make contact with the property that I hunt from different corners and sides and across the road and, whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of human activity, and that's very typical, non-threatening human activity that the deer are used to. So I do take advantage of that, especially to and from my tree stands and trying to find places to park. The situation that we have is on a still morning, let's say, and we're on a gravel road, and you pull down that gravel road and you park. Every deer within a quarter of a mile or maybe even further heard the rocks crunching under your tires. They know you stopped. They're just waiting for the next, foot to drop, basically. They know something's up. But if you pull into somebody's driveway, even if the dog starts barking and you slam a couple of doors, they don't even lift their heads up and look because they're used to normal human activity there. So I do a lot of, I park in a lot of my neighbors' driveways. If they're out cutting firewood or something like that, I'll drive, right back in there and make some noise and, do my scouting or whatever. I take full advantage of the normal human activity because the deer are used to that as being non-threatening. So that's really identical to what Lee's been seeing. Our deer aren't probably quite as used to that throughout the year as maybe what Lee's are, because I'm not sure that I'm out on the farm probably quite as much as what he is. But the other thing that I will agree with him 100% on is I'm a fringe hunter, and I get criticized by the people that come to our website and watch our videos all the time about, how come you're not back in the timber in the morning? And I'll be hunting a certain deer, and they'll all have, a lot of different reasons why I'm not killing him. But usually it centers around the fact that I'm not being aggressive enough. And, we could go on and on about that, and I don't want to tie up your whole program with that topic, but what it seems like I've learned the hard way is if you stick to the fringes and you're consistent with that style of hunting, you may not have those really awesome days, but you're not in there educating a bunch of deer either. And you're going to have those rut days back in the middle of the timber someplace where it seems like every buck is on his feet running past you, and yeah, that's great. But for every one of those, it seems like you have 2 or 3 days where you try to pull it off, and all you do is you bust a few deer, or like Lee says, they pick up your scent on the ground, and now there's 2 of us, with the camera going in as well, so now you got twice as much scent on the ground. It's just really hard to get away with that type of hunting. But if you can hunt the fringes, brushy fence lines between 2 patches of timber, stuff like that, where it's kind of surgical, you can get in and out fairly clean. I just feel like you just put your time in, like Lee said, and over the course of a period of weeks, you end up being successful. But again, we don't really hunt in the real world either. The guy that's got a weekend, a couple weekends to hunt, and maybe 4 or 5 days of vacation during the rut, it might make more sense for him to dive right in because the fact that he's eating deer may not be as big of a deal as what it is for us, because we can still hunt that deer a week later where that guy is going to be back at work or whatever. So anyway, that's my thought. I don't have the deer conditioned quite as well as what Lee does, but I do believe 100% in what he's saying.
Awesome. Well, Bill, thank you for joining us and for making this work with your schedule.
Yeah, my pleasure, and good luck, guys, with the rest of the session here. And I'd love to be able to listen to what you have to say. So when this thing airs, I'll pull up the rest of it and listen to it.
Yeah, and these were the softballs, Grant and Lee. So now you guys get the tough stuff.
See you later.
See you, Bill.
Okay, Bill.
So continuing on that question, though, I just want to get your thoughts, Grant. You know, you hunt. Bill and Lee are both primarily hunting in Iowa. You're down in Missouri. Do you think this idea of consistently conditioning your deer to a certain level of pressure, can that work in other states other than kind of this Iowa slightly different microcosm than the rest of the country in the Northeast or the South? Can that happen there too, or is that unique?
I think it can. I'm not sure it does. I mean, I'm in the southern Ozarks, and we kind of take it a step further. At least a lot of my neighbors here, if it's brown, it's down, and they add that year-round part to it. So I think my deer are kind of conditioned to year-round threats. It's kind of like a war zone here, literally. So we're on the property. You know, I love food plots, love trail cameras, love prescribed fire. We're on the property every single week. And it's still, after owning the property for 14 years, and it's a pretty sizable property, so you'd think we get some deer conditioned to it. And if me or an employee or wife or kids see a deer on the property, I mean literally see a deer, it's still conversation at supper.
Wow.
So our deer live in fear, and it's a good thing I'm known for management and food plots versus being a big buck killer, because I couldn't do it here. I killed a 5-year-old last year, and it was the first time I'd ever seen that deer except in trail camera pictures. I knew him well, but I'd never seen him until he made a mistake and stepped out.
Wow.
So I think conditioning, I think everyone's right here. It's just conditioning can go two ways. It can be positive or negative, and you can condition deer to, feeders. Let's take this one step further. Really recently, like 3 years ago, the state of Georgia legalized feeding in a big part of the state. It had been illegal before, and they legalized it. So it was so modern that a lot of guys were able to set up some really good research. And they looked at harvest success per hour, how many hours it took for the average hunter to tag a buck before legalized feeding, during the first year of legalized baiting or feeding, and then year 2 and 3 after legalized feeding baiting. And it was pretty predictable. So the first year of legalized feed, the deer hadn't been conditioned to avoid them, and harvest rates went up. And everybody was like, oh my gosh, we finally can, do what other states are doing. But year 2 and 3, especially mature deer, they learn to associate those feed sites with danger if you're hunting over them. And they absolutely start avoiding them in daylight hours.
Yeah.
So here where I am, it's in Missouri, it's illegal to have any kind of feed out during deer season if you hunt the area. And several of my neighbors, quite candidly, have been busted for hunting over bait, and they can whip me. I can spend my kids' college education on making food plots, and my neighbor can buy 5 bags of corn. And because there's not enough baiting in the area for deer to really associate that with danger, it's an extremely effective tool. And I have begged the state either start patrolling that more or make it legal for everyone, make it a level playing field. Because anybody can go, right during season, go buy $100 or less of corn and literally slaughter deer because they're not conditioned to avoid that during daylight. They don't have any fear with it yet because it's such a somewhat rare event. Versus states that have legalized feeding, those deer get pretty educated pretty quick. Boy, if I go there in daylight, I hear it thunder really loud, and Mama flops over and doesn't move anymore.
Not a good thing.
So I think deer are very conditionable, and it just depends on what the circumstances are, whether that's a positive or negative for the hunters.
So the next question that I have is kind of in regards to concentrating deer into a specific area. Now, a lot of people, there's kind of a trend for those people who hunt on their own property and are able to manage a specific piece of property. The whole goal is to manage a property to hold a healthy herd. And typically that means more numbers on a per acre, let's say deer per acre, than an unmanaged property. And I'm going to pass this to Grant to ask the question, do you feel that sickness or disease is more likely to spread on a managed property solely based off deer numbers?
I've really been in some deep conversations with some world-leading epidemiologists or guys that study disease lately. I think we're all kind of hitting around the edge of CWD and what's going to happen here, and have some great discussions. And there's the pros and the cons. And I'm a 30,000-foot view guy, so in some of these discussions, I've pointed out that the largest known cases or places where we have the highest incident rate of CWD are in southern Wyoming with mule deer, specifically mule deer, but mule deer and elk, on national forests where for decades and decades it's been illegal and culturally unacceptable to put out any type of mineral or bait. And yet CWD is the most rampant there. Matter of fact, in one mule deer herd, it's decreasing by 19% a year. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that in our lifetime, soon there'll be no mule deer in that area. By the way, the number one cause of death isn't actually the CWD taking them down, but as they become slightly showing external signs of CWD, mountain lions wipe them out. Predators are so keen at picking up any sign that deer is weak or unable to avoid predation. And these mountain lions are tipping over mule deer out there like crazy. And they find the carcasses and do the testing, and they're almost 100% positive CWD. So concentrating deer with food plots or even feed or minerals to date has not been positively shown to increase the spread of CWD. It seems like it might, because you're just like, the kid with the dirty toy at kindergarten. And one kid slobbers on the fire truck and Johnny picks it up and then he gets sick too. So it seems likely, but it hasn't been proven. On the other hand, the biggest body weights and the healthiest deer and the biggest antlers and the highest fawn production, any way you want to measure deer herd health, come off managed properties, whether that's southern. Typically the dividing line is kind of a southern Midwestern thing. So if it's southern, somebody's managing it, they're planting food plots, doing prescribed for our weather. Or if it's where Lee and Bill lived, then the whole place is a food plot basically. I mean, it's ag fields. Commercial ag is feeding a deer herd, and those deer are certainly concentrated in those areas. So our biggest body weights, the highest fawn recruitment rates, the largest antler development are coming from managed properties. It's pretty hard to argue that that's bad.
Is that a double-edged sword, though? I mean, if disease can be spread through higher herd numbers, but also at the same time you can have a healthy herd, is that kind of a double-edged sword?
Well, let's back up again if we're talking CWD, because the only disease that really matters is CWD. EHD, epizootic hemorrhagic diseases, certainly hurt some people. In 2012, we lost a third. We do real intensive survey work here, and we lost a third of our deer herd. My wife is a huge shed hunter and got the dog trained for sheds and whatnot, and I got so sick of her bringing in skulls. That year, I was just so tired. Normally, I love it if she finds the occasional skull, and certainly applaud all the shed antlers she finds. But that year, I got so tired. Well, there's Bernie, there's Big Rack 8, there's whoever. She drug in a truckload of skulls that year, which is unfortunate. But that disease comes and goes. We've known about it for over 5 decades. There's some new strains out there basically brought in from ticks off exotic pets carrying those carriers, so that's pretty trackable. CWD is a big unknown, and in Dakotas and in South Dakota, the deer herd state deer coordinator out there, was in a meeting with him somewhat recently, and he was talking about Wisconsin having a goal of reducing deer down to 30 deer per square mile, trying to slow the spread of CWD. And he just overtly laughed in the meeting and says, guys, in the western part of our state, we dream of getting up to 10 deer per square mile. That's our goal, to finally build our population up to 10 deer per square mile. And that's also currently where we have the highest and fastest spread of CWD. So it doesn't look like it's very density dependent. Again, this is real world evidence, not textbook stuff. This is where the rubber hits the road. So the bottom line is there's so many unknowns for people to be making big claims about this right now is just, I'll go on record saying is unfounded. We just don't know. There's so many unknowns that it's unfounded and spooky. I live in a county that borders Arkansas, and 2 months ago, Arkansas was CWD free. Now I believe they've identified over 100 positive CWD deer in a relatively small area. They went from not on the radar to potentially a hotter spot than Wisconsin. And so states that are going around saying, well, we don't have much problem with CWD or we don't know, I would challenge them to look at their testing. Because if you don't test, you won't know. You won't find it. And the intensity of testing has a huge, huge factor of what you're going to find out there.
Lee, do you, on the farms that you hunt, do you have any experience with CWD or any other sickness?
Not CWD. I think it was just the past couple of years. It's like the first cases of CWD even in Iowa that I've heard of. I think it was just a couple of years ago, and they haven't, done anything drastic against it like they did in Wisconsin. Just eradicating the whole county's worth of stuff. And I think, as far as I'm concerned, to me that didn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm not sure that it, just like Grant said, it doesn't seem like it's high density areas or anything like that cause it. So if we're wiping out your deer herd, that because of a couple of cases of CWD, just didn't seem to make that much sense to me. And I'm glad they haven't done that here in Iowa. But we've had EHD now in the past 3 of the last 4 years, but that's kind of drought dependent, and those were we had the situation like last year I thought it was going to be great, and we had so much rain all early and into the summer, and I thought, okay, it's going to be great, no EHD again this year, and then all of a sudden it stopped raining in July and never rained again, almost 50 days all the way through, and here we had it again. I mean, I'm with you, Grant, I'm just sitting outside now. I'm looking at the pile of skulls I have here, and I don't even pick them up anymore. There's so many of them. I just leave them, and then say, well, maybe up next year, because I don't want to pick up any green skulls anyway. We have to get a salvage tag, and I do on some of them, from our game warden, if they're, ones that are specific deer that I've been chasing, or real big ones or something. Most of them I don't even bother even picking them up anymore. So I'll pick them up next year and do it. But I mean, literally hundreds. I mean, we've lost a lot of deer to EHD. Like, if you were to ask me 5 to 7 years ago, how many 5-year-old plus deer do you think you have on your farms? It's probably 50 to 70. I mean, all of our farms. I mean, we're getting too many because, you're just, that's why I had a lot of my friends and stuff coming in and hunting, because we'd have like a 5, 6-year-old deer that was, not a great genetic deer. So, you're hunting other ones, and they just so many of them stacking, and then they start pushing other good younger deer off. So it's like, man, how do we even get rid of these things? Because pretty soon the farm is filled with, crappy genetic, old deer moving everything else off. So we had to start bringing our buddies in and everything else, to shoot some of those. But now this year, I'll bet you I can count on one hand almost. I mean, maybe a little more than that, but maybe 10 deer that I figure are over 5 years old this year. So I mean, it's knocked them way down. Still a lot of deer. I mean, I'll go out, like this past winter, and I'd see 100 deer in a field, a big cornfield that we had standing still or whatever, and there'd still be $30 out there, but maybe 1 4-year-old and some 3s and 2s, all young deer. And our old ones are just gone. So the EHD is really taking its toll, but I'm not an expert on it. Maybe Grant can talk about it more, but from my understanding, it's from a midge that, when they get bitten by them, and especially when it's dry, all of our creek beds and our ponds, lower way down, and got that exposed. We have muddy bottom creeks here, and from my understanding, they lay in that mud that's nice and cool, in the summer like that, and that's where that stagnant water stuff, when the creek stops flowing, that's where the mosquitoes and midges and everything like that hatch, so they're just more susceptible to it. But we have had 3 of the last 4 years have been drought years, at least into the late season, when they get affected by it. So I'm assuming that's what it is, more weather dependent than deer numbers or anything like that. Because our deer numbers we still have a lot of deer, but just it seems like our older bucks, and you see it, and that's not like it's affecting older bucks. But I'm assuming that bucks are just staying bachelor groups. If one gets it, likely can wipe out all of them. But they're just such a smaller percentage of all the deer. Like, so if you wiped out, if you took 50 mature bucks and 50 does, you won't even notice it in the doe numbers. So I think maybe you just notice it more, but maybe Grant can expand on that more, because I'm still, trying to beat my head against the wall over here what I can do about it. It doesn't seem there's a lot you can do other than maybe spraying for those midges or something, but then you got 200 miles of creek bottoms on your farms, and how do they do it?
I think you're right, Lee. I agree with everything you said. I'll add, and I want to very much clarify, I'll do it probably beginning, middle, and end. This is a theory, warning theory, but several of us scientists kind of agree with it. So this is a myth. It doesn't go deer to deer. It has to go through actually a biting fly, and the fly bites a deer. If you look at a microscope, it's like a horror movie. It's got these giant teeth for its body size. And it bites an infected deer, and then it bites another deer, and some of that infection's on its teeth, so it gives it an injection, basically. So it's going deer to deer through these biting flies. And in a drought, deer go into limited water supplies, so that's where the flies are. They lay their eggs in the mud. As the water level goes down, there's more breeding habitat for these flies. And you could spray, but no one can cover all the ponds and cow tracks and everything else that's holding just a little bit of water. So people have tried that, and I've never heard of a success story, scientifically or otherwise, about that. But the theory is, again, warning, here's a theory. Do flies want to bite through a thick coat of hair? Because they want to go to the blood. They want a blood meal. They bite the deer to get a blood meal. That's why they bite them. Or they want to go to the really richest form of blood that time of year, which is a velvet antler. And a larger velvet antler is a lot easier for flies to get to. And so in the original studies, literally 4 decades ago on EHD, there was no difference in gender of mortality. Males and females died at equal rates. I'm not aware that study's been repeated in modern times, but we're now managing for these older age structure of bucks in a lot of areas. And you've got a lot more bucks with big antlers out there. And if I'm a fly and I'm trying to get an easy blood meal, I'm certainly going to go to a big antlered buck. It's a lot easier to bite through, really short velvet than long deer hair. And mature bucks may be more vulnerable to EHD than other younger bucks or does. And last time, this is theory, warning, this is theory, but on a lot of my clients' land in northern Missouri and southern Iowa, where EHD is it's just been horrible the last few years, we're finding a disproportionate amount of mature bucks.
That's the first I've heard of that, but it makes a lot of sense, and some interesting implications from that. If it ever is proven, if that test, if a test is redone and looked at, that's pretty fascinating. I want to pivot.
Yeah, that doesn't mean, let me state up front, it doesn't mean we don't manage for mature bucks, because mature bucks are going to die. Lee knows they're really rare anyway. That's why we all love them, crave them, seeing them. They're really rare. And we've kind of had a string of odd weather. Doesn't mean it's going to continue. And so it's not a reason for anyone not to manage for mature bucks. It just means that every now and then we're going to lose some, if in fact the theory is true. It may not even be true.
Yeah, I mean, we find a lot of does and smaller bucks too, but you don't really pay too much attention to them. But it's
sure
funny, when we were just doing this, and I was shed hunting this year, driving my 4-wheeler around through the woods and stuff, and someplace I just know, I was telling Tiffany, man, there's like a boneyard out there. But everywhere you go, there's just white bones everywhere for the past 4 years. I mean, it's been pretty devastating, and a lot of those aren't just mature bucks, and there's a lot of does out there too.
Yep.
And some smaller bucks too, but it seems like mostly my bigger ones, and then a lot of does. And this is just me. I'm just not finding a lot of younger bucks. Some here and there, but not as many as like my bigger ones. I don't know if there's anything to that. There might just be just as many of them dead too. That you just don't find all of them. They're not all on your property, so ones could die off your property. A lot of the big ones just disappear. And you just assume they're dead, but, maybe not. But, they can get off your property pretty easy, too, and I don't have, the option of going wherever I want to. So, I just find what's on ours. But, I just hope that weather straightens out. But like the weather's been crazier and crazier every year, seeing more extremes on droughts and rains and everything else. But hopefully we get out of that weather pattern and get back into the wet, normal weather patterns, because it's devastated my older deer, that's for sure.
And it's not like hunting mature bucks isn't tough enough without disease issues
Yeah,
like that.
sure.
So on that topic, related to the hunting of mature bucks, I think most of us, I'm not sure if I can speak for everybody, but most of us, when we started deer hunting, we started just trying to shoot any deer. And then once we were able to shoot a deer, then it was, I want to shoot another few more deer and more deer. And then eventually some of us decided that we wanted to start targeting mature bucks. So my question, and I'm going to send this to you, Lee, first, is whenever you decided to make that switch to targeting mature bucks, what was your greatest challenge related to that? And then what was the greatest lesson you learned to help you overcome that when you were first starting to target mature bucks?
Well, I think it's I don't know that it was necessarily a decision, hey, I'm just going to target mature bucks. I think it's just like anything, you naturally get to the point, if you're competitive at all, it's just like, okay, now I got one I got my first buck. Now, I didn't shoot my first buck till I was, 18 years old. I mean, I hunted my whole life up in northern Minnesota, and they're just, with the wolves and the snow and stuff like that, there just weren't many deer. So, I mean, I bet you the first 12 years that I hunted, I didn't see 12 deer. So I shot a couple does up there, and stuff. So by the time, I even shot my first Pope and Young, I was 25 years old almost. And I mean, it just was such a fanatic about deer up until then. But until I got, was 16 and had my driver's license and was able to, go to other places, places like in the city limits around Minneapolis and stuff where there actually were some bigger deer. And then, you're just starting from scratch. My dad and everybody, they had just all been deer hunters. Basically, if you saw a doe, man, and you had a doe license, you were shooting. I mean, that was the way you hunted up there in northern Minnesota. So I basically had to learn everything on my own. I made so many mistakes and everything. You think of now some of the places that I had access to that, I didn't take advantage of as far as shooting anything good on them. If I knew back then what I know now, it would have been totally different. Back when I first started bow hunting, hardly anybody bow hunted around Minneapolis, around the city limits. You're like, what? You want to try shooting with the bow? Go ahead. Now you go try to find a place there. I mean, they've been hammered so much, it's so hard to find. But I think it's just natural progression. Once you shot one, once I shot my first Pope and Young, that was it. I mean, I was hooked on deer. I used to, pheasant hunt, duck hunt, goose hunt, everything, just because we didn't have many deer. But once I shot my first one, boy, then everything else took second seat to it. And so I've just been, like I said, I've been infatuated with them since I was a kid, but until I started actually having the reality that I could kill one, about when it changed. But I don't, it seemed more that it was a natural progression. Okay, I shot a little one, a porky, now I want to shoot a little bigger one. And then, okay, once I shot my first Pope and Young, and I said, well, I don't really care to shoot a smaller one anymore. I just want to shoot just something that's Pope and Young or better. And now it's just age. It's all about age. I don't care if it's a 190-inch deer, which I have. I've passed 200-inch deer now since then. That because they were 4 years old. I want to see them get to 5 and 6. I think that's a big part of the management. Is I could see it probably a day where I hardly even shoot any of them because I just kind of want to see what they get to. How big they'll get. Because some of these deer we had like 190. That is a deer last year that passed it. I figured he'd be close to 200, probably maybe just under. But he's like a 4-year-old deer, and I want to see. He'll never get to 250 if you shoot him at a 200. So you'd like to see what they'll get to. And of course, after November, I never saw him again. So probably somebody else shot him. So we'd lose some of them that way too. But some of them disappear and they'll come back. But I think it's just a natural progression more than anything. If you're really into it, unless some people maybe don't look at hunting the way that a lot of us do. Some just something fun to do, go out on a weekend here or there, just the way that I'll go out and play tennis or go play baseball or something. It's like, hey, I like doing it, but it's not a passion of mine. But once it's a passion of yours, then you always want to strive to get better and better. I say that to people. I say, well, I'm just a meat hunter. Well, we all kind of are, but you take like any sport, like Michael Jordan. Okay, he's just getting better and better. He may get to the top of his game. He probably doesn't have much desire to go back and play with his high school team, where he could just dominate them, So, but it's the same thing for hunting. Once you get to a point where, okay, I've shot some puppy youngs, I want to shoot some older deer. I don't really care to shoot a younger deer. To me, it's not much of a challenge, anymore. I want a challenge consistently now. I want it to be as hard as possible. What's the hardest animal in the world to hunt? I mean, but there isn't very many 5 or 6 year old bucks. Let's face it. And when you do have one, trying to get them out in daylight is another thing. So it's just that much of a challenge. And I think that's why I started sheep hunting and a lot of the other things that are just so much more of a challenge. So I don't know that it's anything that you really decided. It just kind of happens, where you want something bigger and better than you had before, and you want a challenge all the time.
Now that said, though, was there anything that you learned as you made that transition that actually helped you succeed in killing those bigger deer? Did you change a tactic, or did you see a deer do something one day that all of a sudden made a light bulb click in your head that said, "Oh, this is what I've been doing wrong"? Was there any kind of moment like that just helped you have better success killing those bigger, older deer? What was the biggest change or realization that increased your success rate? I'm curious.
Okay, from that, right at the beginning, it wasn't so much of a tactic. It was, hey, I got to get out of here and go someplace else. Like when I was in high school, people were going to parties. I had my $500 car, and I was driving to Iowa to Kansas, and looking, at deer because they had them. And it was like, okay, I hunted my whole life, and I figured, man, I think I do everything right. You read all the articles, you've done everything, you tried to do scent control, all the wind and all this kind of stuff, and I'm still not shooting them. But then you start seeing when I started going to Iowa and Kansas and places, I spent 90% of my time looking for a spot that had the big one, had bigger deer in it, and then 10% of the time actually hunting them. And I found out that, hey, I was a good enough hunter to kill these. I just wasn't hunting in the right spot. So I'd say the biggest thing is just, hey, if you don't have them, we go out to, the Harrisburg show and saying, oh, we don't have any big deer here. We just, if it's brown is down around here. So, well, you got to go someplace else. Hey, when I was 16 years old and didn't have a penny to my name, I was still scrounging up gas money to go drive down to Iowa or wherever to find some big deer. You may have to do that. But then the second part is just really learning to know age structure of deer, to recognize a 3-year-old when you see it, to recognize a 4-year-old when you see it, and stop shooting those and just holding out for bigger ones. And a lot of people say that to me too when we go out east. Well, if I don't shoot, I have to shoot it. If I see a 3-year-old, I got to shoot because if I don't, my neighbor will. So, well, look, you're that neighbor. You're the neighbor you're talking about. He's saying the same thing about you. You got to just put your foot down someplace. We lose a lot of our 3-year-olds as well. At 3-year-olds, they're the dumbest deer in the woods. Basically, they want to be, prime breeders, but they're not so getting pushed around by the older ones. They're the ones when you're grunting and rattling. They're the 3-year-olds, the ones that come running in. Except to me, they're super easy to kill. And there was a time, a lot of the deer that are on my wall now are just super genetic 3-year-olds. When we first got to Iowa, I was shooting them too because they were 160 inches and sometimes 170 inch 3-year-olds. That, man, you're really looking at, score-wise. But then once they moved down here, you started doing that. You start managing a property, put in food plots and do that. And pretty soon you look at it and say, well, I shot all my 3-year-old good genetic deer and I'd left all my, crappy genetic, 8 points and stuff that are 4 and 5. By the third year, our farm was just run by old crappy genetic 8 points. Like, well, that was terrible management. You thought, you're going to be a deer manager and passing these deer, and by the third year, it's like, I'm a terrible deer manager. I got to go after just that age structure on the thing. And so we start shooting deer that are 5 and 6, no matter how old they were. I mean, no matter what kind of rack they had on them, and just all those good genetic 3-year-olds that came, you try to get them through to 5 years old. So I mean, the biggest thing that I learned is that makes us more successful on high scoring deer is letting them go at 3 and 4 and sometimes even 5 years old. I mean, this year we left several of our 5-year-olds that were in the 180s, 180-inch deer, which you'd normally obviously be super happy with it, but it's just like we lost so many of the EHD. And those deer, made it through all those years of EHD, so maybe they're immune to it, because they've had cracked hooves and stuff in the past. They were like talking to Grant about maybe on the side after the show, but I've heard that someone get it and live through it, and I've seen that. I think that a lot of them live through it, but then supposedly they're immune to it after, and I don't know if that's true or not, but I've seen like the big slipper feet on some of our bucks. They get the big long hooves and cracked hooves and stuff, and one of our bucks in particular still limps on that hoof, but it's been 2 years now that he limps on that, and it hasn't affected his rack. But he was like 100 close to 180 this year, but he was 5, and I'm going to leave him another year because maybe he's immune to that. Just I've got to have some older deer around, to hunt in future years. So, that's probably the biggest thing. It was going someplace that had good deer, and then learning how to age them. To know what a 3-year-old is if you got to pass, and that's hard to do if you don't have your own property because they normally will get shot by somebody else.
And I think you make a really good point there in that, whether you're targeting a deer based on antler size or age structure, if you're setting your goals based on TV or some other thing, you're never going to kill a deer if it doesn't actually live, where you hunt. Mm-hmm. So if your goal is to shoot, a deer like you're talking about, well, that might not be possible in New England. So you either need to adjust where you hunt or you need to adjust your expectations. So I think that's, it's an important thing to think about. Now, Grant, you're in a different situation, very different area than Lee is. For you, when you were starting to go for these either bigger or older deer, was there an aha moment for you that helped you become more successful?
Little different for me. I was raised here in the Missouri Ozarks, so the same part was like Lee. Gosh, I think I was 18 when I tagged my first deer, and it was a button buck, and I was so proud of it and still am to today, and just thought it was great. And grew up in a family that pretty much if you could kill a deer, you were a hero. I mean, people drove by the farm and looked at it, touched it, and talked about it. So those were great fun days for me, and I wouldn't discourage anyone from having those days. And as I went off to school and even grad school, and at that time, I'm dating myself, but decades ago, we started talking about wonder what if deer got older, blah, blah, blah. And I was just always fascinated with that idea once it got explained to me, and I could kind of see it, touch it, feel it, and actually hunted some ranches in Texas where there were older age class bucks, and oh my gosh, I've never seen anything like this, and rattling deer responding to rattling grunt calls. So that just, to me, I love the deer biology and the deer behavior of older age class bucks and the challenge. So an old deer here, a big deer where I live, there's no ag in the counties where I live and on land. There's zero ag. So a giant deer here is a 160. That's like a 220 in Iowa. That's the top of the top of the top of the book. And so if we can grow a 150, 160 consistently, I'm just as happy as I can be, and consider that a good accomplishment, and get to interact with them and see them on trail cameras and maybe see them in person. And I think what you just said is set your goals based on where you live. Mm-hmm. And I tell people all the time, if you want to set high goals, then go to Pope and Young, Boone and Crockett, whichever group you want to go to, and kind of see the top 25% for your neighborhood. And if you're setting your goals at that level or higher, you better be prepared to eat tag soup quite a bit, because those are rare deer. And so I kind of use those, scientists, I got to measure everything. But if you're in an area that, a big deer, for example, and this may shock some people, but my land is split by 2 counties. And Missouri has pretty large counties. In both counties, there's been one Pope and Young ever recorded. I'm sure there's more harvested, but it's all relative to wherever you are, and never a single Boone and Crockett, ever. Horrible place for a deer biologist to live from that point of view. Never. So, and I, meet the local guys at church or wherever, and they're talking, boy, I'm going to kill me 170. I said, no, you're not in this county. I mean, it's just not likely to happen. And if you hold out for that, you're going to eat tag soup so long that you are going to get bored and end up being a golfer or swimmer or, whatever, which is not bad, but you're not going to be a deer hunter because you're just never going to be satisfied. So setting realistic goals for where you hunt. And my goals change. I have a really good friend in western Kansas, and I draw tags out there every now and then. And my goals in western Kansas are different in one way. I'm looking for totally different antlers, but I'm still looking for a 4 or 5 year old animal. That's kind of my harvest criteria. But in some areas, if a guy holds out for a 4-year-old, he's never going to get it. He just doesn't live in that neighborhood.
I want to talk about food plots a second for one reason, and that's because I'm getting ready this summer to plant my very first ever food plot on a piece of property that I have access to. And I'll start with you, Grant, from maybe a health or an attractant type of standpoint. What would your opinion be for the best all-around food plot option?
Oh, gosh, there's literally hundreds or thousands. I don't know. So there's several factors. Some of them aren't talked about a lot. If it's the first food plot, it's probably been a cow pasture or something. There's probably a huge weed seed base there. And so you need something you can control weeds in. And Roundup Ready soybeans is a great first-time plot. Soybeans are pretty easy to grow, actually, and pretty drought-resistant. There's a reason, soybeans feed the world, literally. They're easy to grow and productive. And, of course, deer love them. If you're too small a plot, they could wipe them out pretty quick unless you use electric fence or something. And if you're in an area where deer don't know beans, again, where I am, there's no ag. So the first 3 years we planted soybeans here, it's literally, it's hard for people to believe. For the first 2 years, I do not believe a deer removed a single leaf off soybeans we planted here. Literally. They'd never seen a soybean. Never smelled a soybean. They would walk through the soybeans and eat the blackberry on the edge of the plot where the fertilizer truck spread a little bit. Made me so mad. It's just like people planting turnips or brassicas in areas where deer haven't seen them before. We always talk about learning curve. Deer certainly have a learning curve. You can take apples to Texas and put them on top of a corn pile and they're scratch the apple out of the way and eat the corn. And you can go to New York or Pennsylvania where apples grow naturally and they're all over the place. And, deer love apples and will readily go to them. So soybeans, under the right conditions, are a really easy first-time crop. Clover's an easy crop if you're in an area that doesn't get too hot and your soil maintains moisture. Clover needs a lot of moisture and it needs an awful lot of phosphorus. Most people starve their clover to death. It's the two big killers of clover are weeds, which are not that easy to control in clover, and lack of phosphorus. And if you control weeds and phosphorus, I have clover stands literally 10 and 11 years old that look fabulous. But you got to feed them and you got to keep the weeds out of them. And then your mission. What time of year are you planting this plot primarily as an attractant to hunt over, or is your goal nutrition during the summer? There's, you kind of got to define your crop based on what your mission is. I know I didn't give you a direct answer, but that's just kind of where I come from all the time with people is what's your mission and what's your resources, what do you have to plant with, and how weedy is it going to be?
What do you have for a favorite, Lee?
Well, I think I say it all the time. Mine's clover. I agree with Grant on beans and everything else. But like here, because we do have, not sandy soil, we have good soil, and we got good moisture, so we can grow good clover. But even on those drought years, I planted some, mixed with alfalfa and stuff. So even if it got, so dry again, I had some alfalfa in there that'll grow. But I kind of always think if I can only do one thing, it would be clovers, because people have that seminars and like, clover, heck, it's growing in the kitchen, it's everywhere. They're looking for some exotic bean or something, but for me, it's clover, because I look for something to hunt over and even greater sense, but is deer health. So I look if I had clover fields out, you got good high protein, and a small food plot can feed a lot of deer, puts a lot of tonnage off. So if I have a 1 acre field, it can hold quite a few deer in there eating every day if we got good rain and stuff. And for us here, mostly grasses, so I can hit it with Select Max or Post, so I had to kill most of the grasses out of it. 2,4-DB if it's got some other stuff in it, some other broadleaf stuff in it. So I can kind of keep it pretty much weed free. And most of my clover fields I'll have for 5 to 7 years. Then they start getting a little thin or something. I'll take it out and put something else in there, and then go back to clover, the year after that. But I just look at it for hunting over. It's one of our first things that green up here when the snow's gone and stuff, and the turkeys are in it and deer are in it like crazy. And then it's got good protein, a lot of tonnage through the summer, and then it's one of, we shoot so many of our deer off of it too. So it's something that can last all year. If they use like soybeans and turnips and winter wheat and those things. You don't have them for, the entire season basically. And even our clover, it stays, green underneath the snow. We get, some snow on, even you go on our clover fields, and man, they'll be digging through the snow to get at it. So I think if I could only plant one thing, at least here where I live, because I can grow a good clover field, that would be it if I could only do one thing, because it's good for the health and nutrition of it, plus it's good to hunt over.
I'd say that you guys just doomed Dan, because Dan, the pressure is now on for you to get a terrific food plot in there, because Lee Lakosky and Grant Woods just gave you food plot advice. So don't screw this up.
I'm going to.
So I want to touch on a topic we haven't really talked about much yet, which is wind. When it comes to hunting mature bucks, understanding wind is a huge thing for most of us. And a lot of people, at least that I've talked to, and as I've progressed as a deer hunter, one of the things that I've shifted to paying more attention to is how a specific buck might use wind. When I first started hunting, it was, I want to make sure my wind isn't going to blow towards a deer and spook a deer. But now I'm also thinking about that, as well as how is a buck going to be using the wind to move through an area, and then potentially I could use that to determine where I'm going to hunt. So with that kind of example in mind, how do you believe, based on what you've seen, most often a mature buck will use the wind when traveling? Are you seeing that he's most often going to travel with the wind in his face, or most often to his back, or quartering? What's the most common situation you've seen, Grant? What would you say on that?
I'm going to say it's watching deer with GPS collars. Deer are much more unique than I used to believe. So you asked earlier on a different related question, what's learned, what have you changed? And a big changing point in my life was GPS collars getting inexpensive enough to apply them to deer for research. Really busted my bubble on a lot of things I believed. And one thing it really increased my knowledge on is just how individual deer are. And some deer just have a much larger, in the same area, same resources, same area, much larger home range. Some have much smaller. Some tend to be more active in daylight. They're the same age class than others. Some are bullies. Literally, they try to roam around and beat everybody up. And some are real loners. And I suspect the same is true watching movement patterns in the same area. So, they're all facing the same wind. And some deer tend to have a north-south bearing. Some deer tend to have an east-west bearing in the exact same location. So I think it's more of an individual. I think it goes back to what Bill and Lee both said, is they're not hunting sign. They're hunting travel areas or known areas, and it takes 2 or 3 years or even longer to learn a property. And in that time frame, they may be chasing the same buck. They're probably, maybe have harvested that buck and moved on to a different buck. You're hunting areas that you can that you learn that deer use, that you can hunt without being busted. I think it really boils down to the bottom line.
Okay. And Lee, have you seen anything differently, or do you have a different thought on that?
No, I agree with Grant, because so many deer, they're so individual, and I think that's what makes them so much fun to hunt, because you can't say deer do this any different than you say people do this. Everyone's different. But like in our fields, when I'm hunting the specific deer, it's basically, it seems like I don't think that they pay as close attention to it as I used to think that they did. It's not like caribou where they just stick their nose in the wind and just wander. I mean, obviously our deer are on our farm every day. If they only walk with the wind in their face, heck, they end up 200 miles north by the time the end of the season, because we get mostly north winds, or at least we used to anyway, when we had kind of cool weather patterns. It's been so warm lately that you get at the south and east more than we used to. But for me, it's mostly on, like, say if I have one of my favorite food plots or something, the deer, I know where they generally bed a lot of times, I mean, for the most part, and you know where they're going to come in, and they normally always do. I mean, not that they don't all of a sudden, boom, come in from the other side of a food plot or some here or there, but in general, you kind of know where they bed most of the time, even though they can bed anywhere. But a lot of deer come in from the same places. So it's like, it's more me changing my strategy when you just hunt the places where I can get away with the wind, because I set them up mostly for northwest, but I always have east stands and west stands and everything, because you're going to get all kinds of weather stuff each day. But it's like a lot of times the deer come in the same place in the food plots, no matter what the wind is. So they're not just putting the wind in their nose, but once they're in there, the wind, you got to make sure where you're at is going to be downwind from them. So you just don't hunt them on those days. But I don't see that they're using the wind so much themselves, because they kind of do the same things, come from the same places, no matter what the wind is. It's just what can you get away with. So we just don't hunt them on the days that the wind is wrong, and that's nice by having lots of different setups, lots of different stands. I mean, we have some little food plots. I mean, you're talking 2 acres that there's literally like 6 or 8 setups around it for every different wind situation. And then you'll find some spots that you think is just perfect, and you can bust it all the time. It depends how the wind swirls. And we have other places that doesn't seem to matter what the wind is. So you kind of learn where the structure of your land is just the wind goes up and over the top of them and things. But I don't know that deer specifically use the wind as much as I once thought. And now that I get to look at deer every single day and watch them, even we love going to talk about the feeder at Linda's, and it's not just a feeder there. We've got alfalfa fields and clover fields and soybeans and stuff all around our house where we can see them from our house. So we like going over there just to watch deer. And we'll be tonight even. Like at our house, it's close to the road. So I don't have any food plots any close. I don't want any deer up by our house, so we don't get a chance to see them. But Linda's house is way back in the middle of nowhere. But still, it doesn't matter from the summer months to the winter months. The deer come from the same places all the time. I mean, not that you can't see one buck come from one place, come from another the next day or whatever, but for the most part, the deer always come from the same places. You kind of know where they bed and stuff. So obviously, there's different winds every day, and they're traveling from the same to and from all the time. So I think their nose is good enough that you get enough swirls and stuff that they can always, they're gonna smell stuff that's around, in the timber and stuff. You see it a lot different, like out west, where every time you watch a buck, a mule deer or something go lay down, something, they're always going to have that wind at their back and overlooking the, something open in front of them. And it's like, man, okay, how are we going to get in on that thing? But I don't see that in whitetails, at least where we're at so much. I think they're always using the same trails, doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, too, in relation to, how you said you saw mule deer doing it a little bit differently in different locations. I wonder if this is something that might be, location dependent, pressure dependent as well. Maybe a buck in Michigan might be acting differently than a buck there in Iowa on a, well-managed property. It's definitely one of those things that keeps me up at night thinking about it a lot, that's for sure. So
yeah. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so we have kept you guys a long time here, and this has been terrific, and we appreciate it so much. I want to ask one quick final question, and then let you guys get back to preparing for your turkey hunts or whatever exciting stuff might be up next.
And food plots.
In food plots, yeah. So my question is this, and I'm going to send it to, I guess, Grant first. What is your greatest concern for the future of deer hunting?
I got to tell you, CWD would be up there because there's so many unknowns. Access for a bulk of hunters is way up there. But my biggest concern overall, number one, is behavior of hunters. And I look at it this way, depending on whose math and the stats you want to look at, and there's all different ways of calculating this, but hunters now are somewhere around 6% of the population. So we're never going to be a majority. We're never going to be 51%. And it's proven in our society that some small but well-organized vocal minorities can really have huge impacts. And I think hunters have to maintain a clean act. We have to prove that we're doing a service to society by being good conservationists, not just by reducing deer in Minneapolis and Philly so they're not on the airport runways and in the streets, but managing and conserving species by making better habitat. And by that behavior and really cleaning up our ranks or maintaining clean ranks is how we preserve the right to hunt in America. It's not a God-given right. We've got to fight for it and preserve it. That's my number one fear, that we police our own ranks and take care of ourselves and promote this heritage of hunting.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. I'm glad you mentioned that. Lee, what about for you? What is your greatest concern?
Yeah, I mean, just exactly what Grant said, but I'll add again, just I've got EHD here, so I see that a lot. Well, I don't see the CWD, but I I know all about it, heard all about it, and that one really scares me. That because it isn't like a midge or a fly biting them like EHD when it gets dry, but I do have concerns. They're talking about global warming and those kinds of things. And I don't know. It doesn't seem there's any scientific proof to it. There's some science to say there is, some there isn't. But if there is, I just look at it like the weather patterns. If it was to get drier and drier, and it would just start, taking out deer like that, that's my concern right now, because that's what I see. I'm just, man, what if we start, if it's dry all the time, but are there going to be any deer left? But I think that we're always going to be able to find solutions to things if they really started going down. I mean, I think scientists, people would come up with some solutions to that. But like Grant said, I think that the biggest thing is the people. Like you said, because that's you can always do things to help improve the habitat and stuff for deer, but you can't always do that for hunters. And like I said, and just like you said, 6% of the population, you got to make sure that that we do anything right to maintain this heritage. Because I know how much it's meant to me now, having a young son and stuff, and you want to see him, because there's so many good things that come from it. I look at me all through my high school years and college years, other people maybe getting into drugs or drinking or anything like that. It always just kept me clean. I didn't really care about all that stuff. It all was about hunting, and even just spending time with my family, with my uncles and my grandpa and my dad and things. You get such a, it seems like now when everybody's so busy and both parents working and daycare and stuff, they feel. But to me, the hunting thing is the time that you spend with your kids and family members and stuff. And for me, when growing up, it wasn't that my dad was gonna beat me if I did something wrong. It was more he'd be disappointed in me. And and I think the hunting part was where that closeness came between like me and my dad, my brother, my grandpas and stuff like that. And it's like those are the times that we spent together and had the best, the best times, we spend the most time with them. And that's what I want to see with, you just want to be able to share that with your kids and things. It would just be devastating, I think, for the whole country if that went away, because a lot of it's going away as it is. And that's, I think, the hunting is, people in the hunting families, you see those kids and stuff, how the closeness that they have with their dad or their daughters or whatever. And I think it's a big help. I think we really need that today.
Yeah, so true, so true. I'm so glad that we were able to finish this conversation talking about things as important as getting our families and children out in the woods and being positive representatives of the hunting community, because I think as you guys both said, all the tactics, all the great strategies, all the big deer in the world, that's a lot of fun. But if we don't actually have the right and the privilege and the ability to get out and hunt and share these experiences with our family and friends, none of that matters. So I think this is a perfect place to wrap it up. So Grant, Lee, thank you both so much for taking the time to do this. It has been a pleasure.
Well, thank
Mark,
you.
thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And with that, I'm going to let you guys get back to your important tasks out in the woods. So good luck turkey hunting, food plotting, and everything this upcoming season.
All right, thank you.
All right, well, that was a lot to digest, but very, very interesting. And if you want more of this kind of info, please be sure to check out Lee, Bill, and Grant's own respective websites, which can point you to all the great things they're up to right now. And I've linked to each of their websites on the blog post for this episode on wiredhunt.com. Now, before we wrap things up, though, as promised at the top, we are giving out some terrific prizes from our partners as a thank you to all of you for being a part of the Wired Hunt community and for joining us on this ride through 100 podcasts. So first, here's what's up for grabs. Our friends at Sitka Gear will be giving away a full early season system. That includes their Equinox jacket and pant, their core lightweight long sleeve shirt and bottoms, hanger gloves, and a Sitka ball cap. That is an awesome setup. Ozonics, our partners at Ozonics, will be giving away one of their new dry wash bags, which allows you to turn your Ozonics machine into essentially an ozone wash or closet for all of your gear, and a kinetic backpack, which is an all-purpose hunting pack, which also is designed specifically to allow you to use your Ozonics machine while you're traveling to and from your tree stand. Our friends at Huntera will be providing one of their super comfy branded t-shirts and a $50 gift card to put towards your very own Huntera map. which is a pretty sweet little prize there that you will become quickly addicted to looking at. And our friends at Carbon Express will be providing a package of their Maxima Red arrows. So again, we've got a full early season system from Sitka. We've got a dry wash bag and a kinetic backpack from Ozonics. We've got a t-shirt and $50 gift card from Huntera, and we have a half dozen Carbon Express Maxima Red arrows. Some pretty sweet prizes there, and you guys are well deserving of them, because we appreciate what you guys have done in being a part of this community and tuning into this podcast every week. So we're going to do a random drawing to select who will win each of these prizes, but you'll need to do 2 easy things to be eligible for that drawing. First, you simply need to head over to the Wired to Hunt Facebook page, which you can find at facebook.com/wiredhunt, and find the post for this podcast episode. Leave a comment on that post telling us one thing you've enjoyed about the Wired Hunt podcast over the first 100 episodes, and then share that post on your own timeline. And that's it. All you got to do is go to our Facebook page, comment on our post for this podcast, and then share that podcast onto your own timeline, and that's it. You'll be eligible to be drawn as a winner. So, with that said, to wrap this up, big thank you to all of our partners who have helped make this podcast possible. So thanks to Sitka Gear, Trophy Ridge, Bear Archery, Redneck Blinds, Huntera Maps, Ozonics, Carbon Express, Maven Optics, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. And finally, thank you all for joining us. As I said earlier, it has been an absolute privilege and honor to be with you for these past 100 episodes. So thank you again. Here's to 100 more. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. You simply pour a can into your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. So pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.